Ladies and gentlemen, there are times in life when it feels like everything is falling apart, when you feel abandoned, overwhelmed, or misunderstood. It's easy to think you are exposed, vulnerable, and without protection. The world may push you down, people may betray you, and your circumstances may seem impossible to overcome. But I am here to remind you today that despite everything that may come against you, you're still covered. In those moments when life seems like a storm, when doubts cloud your mind and fears grip your heart, it's easy to believe that God has forgotten about you. Maybe you feel like you're standing in the middle of a battlefield and it feels like there's no one to stand with you, but I want to encourage you to look beyond what you see and understand the unseen truth. You are covered. What does it mean to be covered? To be covered means that no matter what happens, there is protection surrounding you. To be covered means that there is something greater than your circumstances shielding you. Even when you can't see the protection, it doesn't mean it's not there. Just because you can't feel it doesn't mean it's not surrounding you. I know that life isn't always easy. We face obstacles, heartaches, and disappointments that can make us feel exposed. Sometimes we ask, why did this happen to me? Where is God in this? But here's the thing. Your coverage doesn't depend on how you feel or what you see. Your coverage is based on a promise, and God's promises never fail. You're still covered because God's protection isn't determined by the storm, but by the God who is holding you through it. You may feel like you're out in the open struggling or even lost, but I want you to remember that there is nothing in this world that can separate you from the love and protection of God. The world might try to convince you that you're alone, but you're never alone. You're still covered. The storm might be fierce, the road might be long, but the shelter of God's grace and mercy is with you. When you think about how God covers you, think about how he covered the Israelites when they were wandering in the desert. They didn't know where they were going, and they certainly didn't know how they were going to survive, but God covered them. He provided manna from heaven, water from a rock, and protection from their enemies. Even in the wilderness, they were covered. And if God can cover them in their most difficult moments, then surely he is covering you in yours. This is not to say that life will be free of pain or hardship, but what it does mean is that God's coverage is bigger than your battles. His protection is greater than the adversity you are facing. You are covered in ways you may not even realize yet, in places that you might not even see. Sometimes the protection isn't about shielding you from hardship, but providing you with strength to endure and wisdom to navigate through the challenges. And the best part, this covering is not something you can earn. It's not about how good you are, how perfect your actions are, or how much you deserve it. You're still covered because God has chosen to love you and protect you, not because of your worth, but because of his grace. His covering is not a reward for perfect behavior. It's a gift of mercy and unconditional love. When you fall, he still covers you. When you struggle, he still covers you. When you doubt, he still covers you. But the covering doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes God covers us through people. Maybe you've received an unexpected word of encouragement or help when you felt all alone. Sometimes God covers us by giving us peace that passes all understanding, even in the midst of chaos. And sometimes God covers us by strengthening us to stand firm, even when the world tells us to give up. You may not always feel covered, but that doesn't mean you aren't. Sometimes the covering looks like courage to keep going when you feel like stopping. Sometimes the covering is finding hope when everything around you says there's none left. Sometimes the covering is peace in the middle of a storm. I want you to know today that you are not forgotten. Even when it feels like you've been left to face your trials alone, God is still watching over you. He's covering you with his grace, mercy, and love. The shield of his protection is still around you. His promises are still true, and he has not forgotten what he has spoken over your life. You are still covered, not because you are perfect, but because he is faithful. His covering is constant, even when our faith wavers. It doesn't matter if you've stumbled or if you've been hurt. His covering is greater than any pain or failure you've experienced. You're still covered, and nothing can take that away. So the next time you find yourself feeling exposed, vulnerable, or alone, I want you to remember these words. You are still covered. The same God who covered you yesterday will cover you today and forevermore. Trust in his protection. Trust in his timing. Trust that no matter what storm you're facing, he is covering you through it all. Your journey is not one you walk alone. God's covering is with you every step of the way. There are moments in life when it feels as though everything is falling apart. You may feel exposed, vulnerable, and as if you're standing alone in the middle of a storm with no one to protect you. In these moments, it's easy to believe that you are unprotected, that you're facing life struggles without any cover or shield. But even in those times when you feel like you're out there on your own, the truth remains you are always covered. God's protection is not dependent on your circumstances or how you feel in a given moment. It's easy to believe that if life is difficult or if things aren't going the way we want, then we must somehow be abandoned or left exposed. But the reality is that God's covering is constant. It doesn't change based on the chaos that surrounds you or the storms that come into your life. In the moments where you are least aware, that is when God's protection is at its most profound, covering you when you feel most vulnerable. Even though you may not see it or feel it, God is always covering you. This isn't about your immediate surroundings or whether you are aware of it. God's coverage exists beyond the surface level of your perception. It transcends how you see the world in a moment of difficulty. His protection is like an invisible shield that surrounds you, and it doesn't depend on your awareness or understanding. There are countless times in life when you've been protected without even realizing it, when you've been saved from situations, dangers, and difficulties that you never saw coming. Think about the times when you faced challenges and didn't know how you would get through. Maybe there were moments where you didn't even think you had the strength to keep going, but somehow you found the resilience to take the next step. That was God's covering in action. It was not about you being perfect or knowing all the answers, but about God holding you together even when you didn't think you could hold yourself up. His protection over your life isn't about shielding you from every hardship, but is more about his constant presence in your life, guiding you through the darkest of times and helping you stand strong even when you feel broken. God's coverage is present when you walk through times of loss, disappointment, or fear. It's easy to feel like God has abandoned you when things aren't going your way, but that's when his protection is often the strongest. Even in the hardest seasons, God covers you in ways you may not immediately understand. It could be through unexpected support from others, a shift in your perspective that gives you peace, or the ability to find hope in what seemed like hopelessness. God is covering you in ways you can't always recognize right away, but that doesn't mean his coverage isn't there. Sometimes we want God to deliver us from every trial, to prevent every hardship from entering our lives, but God's covering doesn't always come in the form of avoidance. It may not be about stopping the storm. Rather, it's about providing you the strength to endure it. His coverage means that you don't have to walk through the storm alone. You might be in the midst of a trial, but God's protection is there, equipping you with what you need to get through it. His covering doesn't prevent you from experiencing pain, but it assures you that you are never abandoned, even when everything around you seems uncertain. Consider the people who have made it through unimaginable difficulties and come out stronger on the other side. Their strength wasn't in themselves. It was in the coverage of God that never let them go, even when they didn't see the path forward. God's protection often works in the background, unseen but constantly present. His covering is a steady hand that carries you whether you feel it or not. You may be unaware of how his protection has been guiding you through life's challenges, but if you take a moment to look back, you'll realize that even when you didn't know how you were going to make it, God was right there with you, leading you through each step. This covering isn't just about God protecting you from harm. It's about him holding you close when the world around you feels chaotic. You might feel like you are standing on your own, but God's protection is like a cloak wrapped around you, keeping you safe from the negative forces in your life. The truth is, God has covered you in so many ways you may not even recognize. from the small, everyday blessings to the moments of divine intervention that steered you away from danger. This is what being covered truly means, being shielded by God's love and grace, knowing that no matter what you face, you are never facing it alone. When we face our difficulties, we often focus on what's right in front of us, the problem, the situation, or the challenge. But it's important to take a step back and see the bigger picture. Even when life seems like it's falling apart, we are being covered. God's coverage is constant and unchanging. It's a shield that doesn't disappear when we need it most. When you're feeling lost, uncertain, or out of place, you can always find comfort in knowing that God's protection is still surrounding you. It may not look how you expect, but it's always there, always covering you, always walking beside you in everything you face. So when life feels overwhelming and you can't see a way through, remember that you are still covered. No matter how exposed you may feel, God's protection is greater than any fear, any storm, or any obstacle. You are always covered, and that covering is unshakable. Keep trusting, keep believing, and know that His protection will never leave you. God's covering is not about how perfect you are or how well you've lived your life. It's not a reward for your good behavior or for the times when you followed the rules. God's protection is given to you because of His grace, not because you've earned it. This is such an important truth to hold on to, because we live in a world that constantly tells us that we must earn everything, that we have to prove ourselves in order to be worthy of love and protection. But God's covering isn't based on our worthiness. It's based on His love and His promise to protect us, you see. Many of us carry the weight of feeling like we have to be perfect in order to deserve anything good. We feel like we have to earn God's favor, that we must be flawless in our actions, thoughts, and deeds for God to cover us. But that's not how it works. The truth is, you are never going to be perfect. You will make mistakes, you will fall short, and there will be moments when you feel like you've failed. Yet, despite all of that, God's covering remains. You are not disqualified from His protection because of your imperfections. In fact, it is precisely because of your imperfections that you need His grace even more. God knows that we are not perfect, and yet He still chooses to cover us. His grace is abundant, and it flows freely to those who believe in Him. No matter how many times you stumble, no matter how many wrong turns you take, His protection is always there, surrounding you and keeping you safe. His covering doesn't change because you've made mistakes. It doesn't disappear because you've fallen short. God's covering is consistent, unconditional, and unchanging. If you've ever been in a difficult situation where you felt like you didn't deserve anything good, or where you felt like you were too far gone to receive any kind of protection or love, I want you to know that you are still covered. God's love for you is not dependent on how perfect you are. It's not based on your ability to get everything right. It's based on His love and the fact that He sees you for who you truly are, His child, deserving of His grace and His protection. In the times when you feel like you are least deserving, when you feel like you've messed up too many times, or when you've failed in the eyes of others, that's when you need to remember this. God's protection is not a transaction. It's not something that you have to earn. It is a gift that He has freely given to you because He loves you, not because you are perfect, but because He is perfect and His love is unconditional. It's hard for us to wrap our minds around this because we live in a world where everything comes with conditions. We are taught to perform, to meet expectations, and to prove ourselves in order to receive anything of value. But God doesn't work that way. His covering isn't something you have to earn. You don't have to work for His love. You don't have to jump through hoops to receive His protection. It's already been given to you, and it is yours no matter what. God's covering doesn't depend on how many good deeds you've done or how well you followed the rules. It doesn't matter how many times you've fallen short of perfection, because God's love and protection are bigger than your mistakes. He has covered you with His grace and mercy, and that covering remains intact even when you feel unworthy. It's easy to think that God's protection is conditional, that you have to prove yourself to earn it, but that's not the case. His love and protection are unconditional, and they are available to you no matter where you've been or what you've done. In those those moments when you feel disqualified or unworthy, I want you to remember that God's covering is always there, and it doesn't depend on your actions. His protection isn't something you can lose because it's based on his faithfulness, not your performance. You might feel like you're too broken, too far gone, or too imperfect to be protected, but God's grace covers you even in your brokenness. His love is greater than your mistakes, and his protection surrounds you no matter how many times you've fallen short. The enemy often tries to convince us that we are unworthy of God's protection because of our imperfections. He whispers lies that tell us that we're not good enough, that we've messed up too many times, and that we don't deserve God's grace. But the truth is, no one is worthy of God's protection based on their own merits. We are all in need of his grace, and that is why he covers us. His covering is not for the perfect, but for the broken, the weary, and the lost. It's for those who realize that they cannot do it on their own and that they need his help. So whenever you feel like you've messed up too many times, or when you feel like you're too far gone to receive God's protection, remember this: you are still covered, not because of your perfection, but because of his love. His grace covers you, not because you deserve it, but because he is good, and his protection is freely given. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to prove anything. You are covered because he loves you, and his love is all you need. When we face challenges, we often look for ways to avoid them or wish for them to disappear. But God's covering doesn't always prevent us from experiencing hardships. It's not about escaping the storm. Instead, it's about providing us with the strength to endure it. In life, we will face difficulties that we cannot avoid, obstacles that seem insurmountable, and times when we are tested beyond what we thought we could handle. But through it all, God's protection is not about shielding us from the pain. It's about ensuring that we are never alone in our struggles. Sometimes we pray for deliverance from our problems, asking God to take away the challenges that make us uncomfortable. And while God does intervene in miraculous ways and can provide us with peace, sometimes his covering comes in the form of giving us the endurance to push through the tough times. It's easy to expect that God's protection will prevent the storm from coming, but God's greater promise is that he will be with us through the storm, giving us the strength, the wisdom, and the perseverance we need to keep going, even when it feels like everything around us is falling apart. The truth is, the storms of life aren't always avoidable. There will be moments when the weight of your circumstances feels overwhelming, and it may seem like there's no way out. But even in those moments, God's protection is with you. His coverage doesn't mean you won't feel the effects of the storm. It means that he will equip you with the ability to endure it. God doesn't promise a life free from trials, but he does promise that he will never leave you and that his presence will be with you, strengthening you in your weakest moments. Think about how many times you've faced adversity and wondered how you would ever make it through. You may have doubted yourself, questioned whether you had the strength to keep going, but somehow you made it through. Somehow you stood tall even when you felt like you were crumbling. That is the strength that comes from God's covering. It's not about feeling strong in the moment, but knowing that even when you feel weak, his strength is made perfect in your weakness. His protection is there not to stop the storm, but to carry you through it. God's covering often looks different than what we expect. We may pray for things to get easier, for the storm to pass quickly, or for a smooth path ahead, but God's covering doesn't always come in those forms. Sometimes his covering looks like peace in the middle of chaos, courage in the face of fear, or clarity in the midst of confusion. It's not always about changing the situation. Sometimes it's about changing how we see the situation and giving us the strength to keep moving forward. God's protection is there even when the storm is raging, and it gives us the ability to keep walking step by step through the hardest seasons of life. One of the greatest ways God's covering manifests is in the way he provides us with the strength to endure. You may not always understand why you're going through certain challenges, and you may question why God is allowing you to experience pain or hardship. But know this, God does not waste your pain. Every trial, every struggle, and every obstacle you face is an opportunity for God to show you his strength in ways that you wouldn't have otherwise known. When you feel like you cannot go any further, he is there to lift you up and carry you through. Consider the example of the Israelites in the wilderness. God didn't just take them out of Egypt and leave them to figure things out on their own. He provided them with food, water, and protection. Even though they were in the wilderness, they were never alone. God's covering was with them, guiding them every step of the way. He didn't take them out of the desert, but he provided everything they needed to endure it. They were able to endure because of God's strength and provision. Similarly, when you face your own wilderness moments, you can rest assured that God's covering will provide you with the resources and strength you need to endure and persevere. Life storms are inevitable. You can't escape them, and they won't always be easy to bear, but God's covering is a promise that you will never face these challenges alone. His protection is there to equip you, to provide you with the strength to keep moving forward. It's not about avoiding difficulties, but about being able to walk through them with his help. You will face struggles in life, but in every trial, God's covering will be there to help you stand firm. He gives you the strength to press on when everything inside of you says to give up. His coverage isn't about shielding you from the pain, but about helping you endure it with grace and resilience. When you walk through life's challenges, remember that you don't have to go through them alone. Even when it feels like the storm is too much to bear, God is with you, giving you the strength to keep moving. His protection isn't about making everything easy. It's about providing you with what you need to endure. So whenever you face a trial, remember that you are never facing it alone. God's covering is with you, and he will give you the strength to endure no matter how fierce the storm. There are times in life when it feels as though we are walking through the darkest moments, unsure of where to turn or how we are going to make it through. We often expect God's protection to be visible, something we can touch, see, or feel in a tangible way. However, the reality is that God's coverage is not always seen. It's easy to think that we are unprotected when we can't physically see the shield surrounding us, but that doesn't mean it's not there. Often, God's protection works in unseen ways, quietly working behind the scenes to guide us, strengthen us, and keep us safe. In the midst of trials, we can become overwhelmed by what is visible to us, our fears, our doubts, the problems that seem insurmountable. But what we often fail to recognize is that even in the most challenging circumstances, God's coverage is always present, even if we can't immediately recognize it. Protection doesn't always look like we expect it to. Sometimes it's a stillness that calms our anxious hearts, or a strength that rises up within us when we thought we were too weak to continue. It may not always be an obvious force, but God's protection is there, providing us with what we need in ways we may not even notice at first. One of the most important aspects of God's covering is its ability to shield us even when we aren't aware of it. It's easy to think that when things are tough or when we're going through a rough patch, that God's protection must somehow be absent. We question why God isn't intervening in a way we can see, but in reality, he is constantly working, guiding, and protecting us even when we don't realize it. The truth is that God often works in ways we don't expect, and his protection may look different than what we imagine. This doesn't mean that he's abandoned us. Rather, it's a reminder that God's ways are higher than our ways, and his protection doesn't always take the form we assume. Take a moment to think about all the times you felt like you were on the verge of giving up, only to find yourself standing strong even though you didn't feel capable. That's God's protection working in unseen ways. You might not have seen the path ahead, but somehow you found the strength to keep going. You may not have seen God's hand at work in your situation, but he was there, quietly guiding you, leading you, and making a way when there seemed to be none. His protection is sometimes subtle, but always powerful, carrying you through moments when you felt incapable of moving forward on your own. In the same way, God's protection isn't always about rescuing us from our circumstances. It's about providing us with the resilience, wisdom, and peace to endure. Sometimes times, we expect God's intervention to be dramatic, but more often than not, his protection looks like peace in the middle of chaos or clarity in the midst of confusion. We may not always understand the ways in which he works, but that doesn't change the fact that he's working behind the scenes. We are protected not just from external dangers, but from the internal struggles that threaten to overwhelm us. God's unseen covering is often the inner peace that rises above our fears, the sense of calm that reassures us even when everything around us feels unstable. One of the most profound examples of God's unseen protection is the way he provides us with the right people at the right time. Often we don't recognize the hand of God in these relationships until after the fact. When we find ourselves struggling, God may place someone in our path who offers just the support we need, a word of encouragement or a listening ear. These moments can feel coincidental, but they are evidence of God's protection at work. Sometimes it's not about a grand miracle. It's about the small, subtle ways in which God shows his love for us by ensuring that we are not alone. Even when we cannot physically see God's hand, he is working through the people around us, ensuring that we are supported and cared for. God's covering also works through the small nudges we receive in our hearts, the quiet prompting that guides us toward the right decision. In times of uncertainty, God's protection is present when we feel led to take a particular step, avoid a certain situation, or act in a way that ultimately benefits us, even if we can't fully explain why. These moments of guidance may not be visible in a tangible way, but they are evidence of God's hand in our lives, protecting us and leading us toward his plan, even when we can't see the entire picture. Another way that God's protection works in unseen ways is through the way he sustains us spiritually. When we're exhausted and overwhelmed, God's covering provides us with strength that we don't even realize we have. We may not always feel strong, but we are often given the energy and resilience we need to carry on, even in the toughest times. This strength may not always be visible to others, but it is real, and it's a direct result of God's unseen covering. In the moments when we feel like we are running on empty, God is quietly filling us up, providing us with what we need to keep going. The fact that God's protection is often unseen doesn't make it any less real or powerful. Just because we don't see the ways in which he is working doesn't mean that he isn't actively protecting us. In fact, God is often working in the background, ensuring that his covering is constant and effective, even when we're unaware of it. We may never fully understand all the ways in which God's protection manifests, but we can trust that it is always there, providing us with everything we need to navigate life's challenges. God's covering is not confined to what we can see or understand. It extends far beyond our comprehension, and it is always at work, even when we don't realize it. When we face adversity or difficulty, it's common to feel as though we are alone in our struggles. We might feel that our challenges are too great to bear and wonder if God's covering has somehow disappeared. However, one of the most profound truths we can hold on to is that God's protection is not dependent on our feelings or perceptions. It's not based on our emotional state or the external circumstances surrounding us. Even when we don't feel it, God's covering is always present, ensuring that we are never truly alone. It's easy to believe that God's protection is only real when things are going well or when we are experiencing peace in our lives. But God's covering doesn't fade in times of struggle or difficulty. It is constant, even in moments when we feel overwhelmed, lost, or forgotten. God's protection is not bound by our emotions or the ever-changing circumstances of life. His coverage is secure and unchanging, providing us with the safety and security we need no matter what we're facing. This truth can be incredibly comforting because it means that even when it seems like the world is falling apart, God's protection is still there, offering us a steady foundation on which we can stand. At times, it can be difficult to grasp the fact that God's covering is always present, especially when life feels chaotic or uncertain. When we feel overwhelmed by the storms of life, it's easy to think that we are being abandoned or that God's protection has somehow failed us. However, the presence of the storm does not equate to the absence of God's protection. The reality is that God is often closest to us when we are going through our hardest times, working behind the scenes to ensure our strength, resilience, and peace. God's protection doesn't always look the way we expect it to. We often imagine that being covered by God means that we are shielded from every hardship or that we are immune to difficulty, but God's protection is not always about preventing us from experiencing pain. It's about providing us with the resources we need to face life's challenges with grace, wisdom, and strength. Even in the midst of hardship, God's covering gives us the strength to persevere, the peace to keep moving forward, and the courage to face whatever lies ahead. Sometimes we may question why certain challenges have come our way or why God allows us to go through seasons of suffering. In these moments, it's important to remember that God's protection doesn't always prevent us from feeling pain. It provides us with the ability to endure it. His coverage is not about removing all obstacles from our lives, but equipping us with what we need to face those obstacles head on. It's about knowing that no matter how tough the journey gets, we are never alone. God walks with us through every trial, offering his unwavering protection and guidance along the way. When life's difficulties arise, we may find ourselves questioning our worth or feeling disconnected from God. We might wonder if we are unworthy of his protection or if we have done something to deserve being left unprotected. These thoughts are natural, but they don't reflect the truth of God's love and care for us. His covering is not earned through our perfection or behavior. It is freely given because of his deep, unchanging love for us. Even in moments when we feel undeserving, God's protection remains, covering us in ways we may not fully understand but can trust wholeheartedly. Another crucial aspect of God's covering is that it is not just a one-time act of protection. It is a constant, ever-present shield that surrounds us in every moment. Just as the Bible says that God is our refuge and fortress, his covering provides us with a continuous, unbreakable sense of security. When we trust in God's protection, we can be confident that we are always under his care, no matter where we are or what we are going through. His coverage is not momentary. It is constant, enduring, and ever reliable. There will be times when we feel weak, vulnerable, or unsure of ourselves. In those moments, God's protection provides us with a strength that we cannot find on our own. His covering doesn't depend on our ability to hold it together or our strength in the face of adversity. It rests on his ability to sustain us even when we are at our lowest. This truth allows us to surrender our fears, our insecurities, and our doubts to him, knowing that he is big enough to carry our burdens and provide us with the covering we need to keep going. When we experience setbacks or face difficulties that seem insurmountable, it's easy to lose sight of the fact that God's protection is still with us. We may get so focused on the problem that we forget to look up and remember that God is right there with us. His protection isn't just about removing obstacles from our lives. It's about helping us navigate through them with faith and courage. Even when we don't see immediate solutions to our problems, we can trust that God's covering is there, holding us up and guiding us through the process. God's protection is not something we have to earn or strive for. It is a gift that he has already given us, and it remains with us at all times. When we lean into his covering, we can find the strength to endure, the peace to move forward, and the hope to keep going. Even when it feels like we're surrounded by darkness, God's protection is the light that leads us through. It doesn't matter what we face, whether it's a difficult season of life, a personal struggle, or a challenging circumstance, God's covering is constant, unwavering, and enough to carry us through it all. So when life feels heavy and you wonder if you are still covered, remember this: God's protection is always with you, even when you can't see it. His coverage is not based on your feelings or your circumstances, but on his everlasting love and faithfulness. You are always under his care, always protected by his love, and always covered by his grace.